I was about 15 years old, visiting my cousin's house for about 2 weeks during the summer, and this is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. It was about 3 days into my visit, and my cousins and I decided to hook up the trailer to the four-wheeler and go down for a ride on the trails. It was about 5:30, so it wasn't necessarily dark, but it wasn't bright out either. My 13-year-old cousin, I'll call Andy, was driving the four-wheeler while myself and my other cousin, who I'll call Aaron, were sitting in the trailer. We have done these kinds of rides before with no problem, but I had a bad feeling about this one, ever since he started the engine. It was about 20 minutes into the ride when we decided to go off trail and further into the woods. The trailer had little trouble going through the brush since we put nice off-road tires on it. We ended up getting pretty deep into the woods, and we came across an old abandoned-looking house with a small garage on the side of it. We stopped the four-wheeler and shut it off. My cousin Andy turned around in his seat and said,
"Yo, let's go check it out."
I immediately started shaking when he said that, as I was scared to find out what kind of things could be inside. He jumped off the four-wheeler and came over to me and pulled me off the trailer, while Aaron got off the trailer himself. He pushed me forward to the garage, and I stumbled over a small log on the ground and fell over. My two cousins were giggling a bit before helping me up. I yelled, "What the fuck, Andy?" Right after I yelled this, the garage door slammed upward, revealing the contents inside, and a tall human-like figure standing in the doorway. I say human-like figure because as I looked up at him, he had a goat head instead of a human one. He stepped closer to us, and we backed up quickly. I looked past the goat man, seeing the horrifying things inside the garage. Inside were bloody knives and gardening tools, with what looked like bloody deer bodies hanging from the ceiling. I never ran so fast and screamed so loud in my life. We all ran back to the four-wheeler and jumped on, and started the engine and sped off quickly and recklessly, almost throwing me and Aaron off the trailer. Right when we got back to the house, we sprinted inside, grabbed our hidden pack of smokes from under the couch cushions, and ran upstairs to smoke and tried to figure out what the fuck just happened. We didn't sleep at all that night and didn't tell my cousin's parents either. I'm 18 now and haven't been back to their house since then, but I still have nightmares about the Goat Man. East Texas, summer of 1999. A true story. My cousin Allie, my sister Becca, and I used to all play together in the woods during the summer as children. Our grandparents owned a ranch there, and our parents would drop us off for weeks on end, all the way up until I was 11, Allie was 8, and Becca was 12. We would just run out into that great, hot wilderness, playing imaginative games and terrorizing Grandpa's poor dog, Daisy. The woods held all kinds of wonders for kids. Armadillo holes, abandoned cars, and a shallow, dirty creek we were absolutely forbidden to cross. At night, Grandpa would sit and chew tobacco on the porch and tell us stories, while Grandma cooked cornbread and black beans on the wood stove. Those summer nights took on a magical atmosphere, with the constant hum of cicadas filling the air and the smell of smoke. One night, Grandpa sat us down on the porch and, spitting out his tobacco, said,
"When I was just about your age, Jack and me built a treehouse on the other side of that creek. Course we called it Fort Deliverance. Had a lot of battles in that fort. Kept the gnomes out of this ranch."
We collectively rolled our eyes. Grandpa talked a lot about the gnomes. He said they lived in the woods and would play tricks on people. He said, if you looked hard enough, you could see them out of the corner of your eye, darting behind a bush or two. Of course, we'd been through every inch of the woods and hadn't once seen one. "There ain't no such thing as a gnome," Becca whined.
"These woods make things come true that ain't usually true. You believe in something hard enough, it'll come true. Especially at night. Jack and me, we believed really hard in those gnomes."
And with that, dinner was served, and we didn't talk about the gnomes anymore. Later, when we were all trying to get to sleep in the tiny bedroom reserved for the kids, Allie whispered, "I think I saw a gnome today." "Nuh-uh," I said. that's just Grandpa's stories.
I don't know. I saw them.
We proceeded to mock Allie for believing in the gnomes until we grew tired of it and fell asleep. The next day, the three of us went out to the woods as usual. I remember it distinctly. 97 degrees, the acrid smell of suntan lotion and DEET liberally applied by Grandma as we ran off. As Allie ran off into the woods, Becca pulled me aside and whispered, "Let's fool her. She's so young. She'll believe any story. So let's make one up. Something scary." Giggling at the prospect of terrifying my little cousin, I agreed. We walked along the banks of the shallow brown creek, kicking stones into the water. That's when my sister decided to invent Goatman, with an unsubtlety only achieved by children her age.
"I went to Fort Deliverance last night," she went on in a sing-songy voice, "and I saw Mr. Goatman. He had a bottom half like a goat. He walked on hooves like this." She pantomimed a weird gait. "And he had the top half of an ugly old man with rotten teeth and big black eyes." "Yeah, I saw him too," I chimed in. "He told us to come down to his house, but we didn't go 'cause Goatman eats children." Allie chucked a rock into the water. "Did not. We were asleep in the same room." "Well," I said, "you were asleep. Not me. I saw Goatman, and now he knows about us." Giddy with our newfound myth, Becca and I started prancing around like goats and regaling our cousin with tales about the Goatman. "Didn't you know Goatman made kids with catfish stew? Didn't you know Goatman could speak to the animals and got them to spy on people? Didn't you know Goatman lives underground and could hear you when you walked?" Our mythology wasn't exactly consistent, but over time it became clear that Allie was at least taking the bait. She was asking questions about him now. "Does Goatman wear clothes?" "Well, of course, but only over his man part." "Does Goatman eat grass?" "No, only meat and bones." "Where is Goatman's hiding hole?" "Why, in the tree beneath Fort Deliverance." We spent the whole day talking about Goatman, and after a while, it became hard to deny his existence. At least, that's the way it worked in our child's minds. I guess that's the way all superstitions must form, children playing question and answer games in the woods. On our way back home, I swore I saw something move in the corner of my eye. That night, none of us could sleep. I kept thinking about Goatman breaking off a kid's arm and throwing it in a pot of catfish stew. Eventually, Allie whispered, I'm scared, guys. Goatman can't get us in here, right?" Becca whispered back darkly, "I don't know." The wind hitting the windows was not wind, but the howling of Goatman. The cicadas were spying on us, telling Goatman how to find us. I was sure Goatman was the shadow in the corner, watching us. Allie woke us up sobbing several times in the night, saying she wanted her mother. She kept saying that Goatman was watching through the window while we slept. After the third time this happened, Becca admitted, "Don't be scared anymore. It's annoying." I made up Goatman. We made up the whole thing. But I saw him," she insisted. He was in the window. He has to be real." "What do you want me to do?" Becca asked, putting a pillow over her head. "Just shut up about it. You're freaking me out. He's not real." Allie's sobs died down, and eventually we all went to sleep. The next day, we had all but forgotten about the Goatman. We stayed out of the woods, though. I still couldn't help but make sideways glances at it, fearing at times that a tree branch was a backwards-facing goat leg. A week passed, and we started playing in the woods again, this time pretending to be Pokemon trainers and all claiming that we had caught the best Pokemon in this tree or that tree.
At some point, we got the idea to try to find Fort Deliverance, which meant crossing the creek. We wandered downstream for a few minutes until we came to a set of stones that crossed the creek, leading up to a big oak tree with a decaying tree fort up top. That's where we found Goatman. He was wading through the water at the far end of the creek, intently looking down into the water. Walking with a strange gait, he was sunburnt all over his pale body, gray hairs sprouting from the back. He had a spindly gray beard, beady black eyes, and a mouthful of crooked teeth. We didn't see his legs, but we were sure of what they were. We stood silently for a moment, too scared to move. Goatman lurched suddenly, grabbing something slimy out of the water. He let out a strange, otherworldly cackle as he pulled a catfish out of the creek by its mouth and tossed it onto the shore. The three of us turned and ran. In the panic, Allie tripped on a tree branch and stumbled into a small ravine, screaming. When we turned to help her, we saw that she had impaled her small right foot on a sharp stone, and she was bleeding with a twisted ankle. Sobbing, the three of us sat there, having no idea what to do. Becca, without explanation, got up and ran as fast as she could away from the two of us, leaving Allie and I alone in the ravine. I still have nightmares about her bounding up the slope as I screamed for her to come back and help us. As I tried to pick Allie up and get her to walk, Goatman came through the foliage at the top of the ravine, dripping with water and holding the catfish in his hand. I swore he had reversed hooven legs. Allie closed her eyes. I was tempted to do the same, but then I remembered what Grandpa said about believing in things.
I don't believe in you! I screamed at Goatman over and over again. We made you up! You're not real!
What in blazes are you kids doing?
Grandpa said from behind me. Becca had gone to get him.
You're gonna get yourself hurt bounding around like that.
Goatman disappeared into the foliage faster than I could blink, and Grandpa came down into the ravine to help us. We were all crying our eyes out and blubbering about the Goatman.
That's all right, kids. I believe in you. I believe in you,
is all Grandpa would say to us. We never went back into the woods. For years, the three of us have told inconsistent stories about the events. Becca claims there was never even a man in the water, that she was just playing along with it. Allie says it was probably just a local man catfish hunting. But me? I know it was the Goatman. I was the only one to see his legs. Grandpa died 2 months ago, and he put in his will that the three of us were to jointly get the deed to the property. Now that some of us have kids of our own on the way, we're thinking about turning it into a summer retreat, even though it's been largely abandoned for the past few years with our grandparents' failing health. We're planning on going out there to clean things up next weekend. I think the Goatman has affected all of us in different ways. For Becca, he's a sign of mass hysteria. Goatman is what happens when you have a group of impressionable people who all want to believe in something really badly. Allie, on the other hand, has channeled her fear of the Goatman into religion. Satan is like her new Goatman, except she's not nearly as afraid of him. And as for me, every time I walk over a creek or river, I shiver a bit. The woods have eyes and stare back at me. I know he's just a stupid myth that we made up, but that doesn't make him any less real. I'm planning on going out to Fort Deliverance and fixing it up this weekend. It will be my personal project. I think Grandpa would have wanted it. Hopefully then, I can put this stuff to rest. During 1999, I worked briefly as a vacuum cleaner salesman. Yes, the job was as terrible as it sounds, which required very late nights as I was often at customers' homes till around 9 p.m., before having to go back to the head office to check in, then drive back home, often not arriving home till around 12 or 1 a.m. I was working late this one particular night and was on the home stretch, around 10 minutes from home, when my old crappy Ford Fiesta started to overheat. I knew the car wouldn't make it home and had no choice other than to pull into a lay on top of the big, dark, deserted mountain next to my town. My hometown is literally the last town before there are just mountains and forests for countless miles. As I pulled into the mountain parking area with steam pouring out of my engine, this is 100% true by the way, a white humanoid figure, obviously surprised that a car was pulling into a deserted parking space in the middle of the night, ran directly in front of my headlights as it sprinted from the edge of the clear side of the parking area and into the forest on the other side. It had no clothes, features, genitals, and hair, etc. Just a white figure with 2 arms and 2 legs that appeared almost luminous and reflective in my lights. To say I shit myself is a bit of an understatement. My eyes popped out of my sockets when it ran in front of me, but then I realized that I was stuck in a dead car in a deserted mountain lay in the middle of the night with no mobile phone signal. This was back in the days when mobile phones were just starting to become popular, and large chunks of the country were missing from network coverages. I had no choice but to sit there for an hour until my car cooled down, as it gave up the ghost pretty much the second I pulled in. So I sat in my car, alone, staring directly into the forest where the thing I saw had run. No weapon, no way to contact anybody to let them know where I was, and no passing traffic to possibly flag down. I knew for a fact that I had actually seen something, and it was not a trick of the light. That much was clear. I discounted sheep, horses, foxes, or any other animal that populated the Welsh mountains, as I was certain it was a 2-legged humanoid. It had a roughly human head, body, arms, and leg proportions. The obvious answer would have been it was some very strange man who for some reason was wearing a white entire body stocking. Think Charlie's Green Man from It's Always Sunny. But since we were miles away from the nearest home, and I was the only car around, it's highly unlikely that someone would have spent hours walking through thick forests just to hang out in a parking area in the middle of the forest wearing a unitard. Since I could rule out possible humans or animals, I had to consider the alternative, which isn't a nice thing to think about when you are stuck in a broken-down car with a creature very possibly still outside. I didn't think it was aliens, as it was too tall compared to the classic look, while any type of apparition or ghost doesn't tend to run away from people when surprised. I'm not sure if there is some kind of Welsh version of a Goatman, but if I had to categorize the encounter, this would be my number 1 choice. There was always talk of satanic rituals and witches practicing in the forest when I was a kid, and also of illegal bare-knuckle fights where people had been killed and buried there to cover up the crime. But I didn't think much of it at the time, and always wrote it off to superstition and rumor. But now, I'm not so sure. Eventually, my car cooled down enough for me to limp back home. No one really believed me when I told them what I saw, and are adamant that it was a sheep. But to this day, I swear that the creature I encountered was something different. I've been in the forest many times since then, camping, biking, and hiking, and have never seen anything like that again. But whenever I go there, I am always aware of the possible presence of the Goatman. I love hiking. I love walking into the trees, getting further and further from civilization. The sounds of industry grow dimmer and dimmer. The sounds of nature take over. But that was before last night. Before last night, I thought I knew what was in the forest. I was sure that the most dangerous thing was a hungry bear or a twisted ankle miles from help. I may have been a fragile female, as my father liked to claim, but I was tough. I had more than enough knowledge and experience of basic survival. But meeting monsters and meeting Goatman, I expected none of that when I waltzed into the woods for what I figured was a routine overnight trip. I'd done it many times before, rolled into the parking lot of the Appalachian Trail at 8 o'clock a.m., armed with a small tent and the backpack it was attached to. My backpack was packed with food, water, a flashlight, a change of clothes, a first aid kit, a lighter. I was prepared. I thought I was prepared. It's always after I've gotten out of my Subaru and moved to the hatchback of it that I'd taken any others in the lot. A couple and their dog were making their way into the forest. Another car was already locked in left end, a pair of men, big guys wearing camo. They were hanging out by the tailgate of a truck, beers in hand. I turned away as one of them seemed to notice me looking. I could feel their eyes on me, though I ignored it. I glanced at them only briefly. They had fishing poles. Why do you need camouflage for fishing? I had thought to myself. I was focused on getting my gear out, so I didn't notice at first when one of them walked closer. His foot finally landed on a branch, that telltale crunch alerting me to his presence. He reeked. A mixture of cheap beer, sweat, and grease. He was smiling a gap-toothed grin. His beard was ragged. When he spoke, the stench grew.
Better be careful out there, darling. These woods get dark at night.
His eyes trailed over me. I puked a little in my mouth. Thanks. I forced a grin. But I think I'll be fine. I finished putting my backpack on with a pointed clip of the chest strap. He grinned wider, though he took the hint and stepped back. I closed the hatch and moved past him, not bothering to fake politeness any longer, keeping my eyes ahead of me. I pressed lock on my keys and dropped the keys into one of my cargo pant pockets. The man and his friend were chuckling as I made my way across the bridge towards where the trail had split. The sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt watched long after I turned the corner out of sight, following the creek down into the valley between the mountains. I should have left. Shouldn't have ignored the way my instincts were screaming. Fortunately, I was good at ignoring things by pushing them to the back of my mind. By noon, it was all but forgotten. The silence was strong, only broken by the occasional cry of a bird or the gentle rustle of leaves as a squirrel hopped by. It was a deep sort of silence that only the white noise of the breeze blowing through the trees could achieve. That's why I hiked. I could let it all go, focus on nothing but my footsteps, my breathing, the quiet murmur of the river. I stopped for a granola bar at what was probably an hour past the last time I looked. I wasn't concerned with the time, so I can't say for sure. I sat on a rock a little off the path. It overlooked a small pond, where the water pooled before spilling down along the river. It was then, amidst the bubbling of the brook and the crinkling of my wrapper, that I first heard it. It made me pause. I think I stopped mid-chew. It didn't fit in at all with the forest sounds I was accustomed to. It was wrong. It took a couple of seconds before it registered as words, sounding as if they were being said through auto-tune or Google Translate, like there was a filter or hesitation or misunderstanding.
Wrong. Wait. This. Let's not.
Garbled, inconsistent, like catching every other word of a sentence without the proper pause or context needed for the missing words.
Look. Trail. Wait.
I was frozen, completely and utterly. I think I stopped breathing. The footsteps came next, with no pace or rhythm to them. I was reminded of my 11th birthday, when we went horseback riding. It wasn't a clip-clop, but it was close enough that my mind conjured up images of the Jersey Devil stamping its way through the woods, though the Pine Barrens are about 100 miles south. A breeze blew by, and it came with the stench. Rotting meat, like when I'd found that dead cat under our back porch, maggots writhing as they gorged on the dead flesh. I gagged and had to clamp my hand over my mouth to stop from retching. My eyes watered, mostly from the smell, but maybe a tiny bit because fear had taken hold of me. My heart beat like a drum in my chest as those footsteps got closer and closer. I pressed myself to the tree, blocking me from sight of the path. It felt like an eternity before it was passing behind me. I could hear its wheezing breath, deep and labored, as it lumbered down the trail. And then it was gone, around a bend, crooning something about,
Look. Leaves. Trail.
I sat on that rock, not daring to move, for minutes after. I was at war inside my mind, trying desperately to convince myself that I'd imagined it or that it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was a confused old man lost in the woods. Maybe a dying deer was downstream somewhere. That explained the smell, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, shaking my head. If I don't think about it, then it doesn't worry me. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying slightly. I looked at the half-eaten bar in my hands, my stomach rolling at the thought of food. I threw the bar in the river and shoved the wrapper in my backpack. I drank half a water bottle, suddenly desperate for that cleansing cold on my palate. I contemplated leaving, but I didn't. I certainly didn't want to continue after it, but to go back now would mean walking during dusk. I wouldn't be back to my car before dark. If there's one thing I was always told, it's that there is never a good enough reason to be walking through the woods at night. The predators come out at night. I cautiously got back on track, keeping my pace slow so as to not catch up to nothing, because there was nothing there, right? I walked for another hour or two, hyper-aware now of every sound and movement. At one point, I thought I heard some more words behind me. There was also a faint smell. Not one of decay, but still like something I'd smelt before. I kept on moving. The spot I was looking for was only a little further, and I found myself hurrying, despite my fear, ready to set up camp and hide myself away for the night. It seemed like the sun was setting before I knew it. By then, I had made it into the clearing I generally used as camp, which I'd finished setting up in no time. Where I was off-trail quite a bit. It required a fair amount of effort getting to, being as it was through the thicket of non-trail, but I felt oddly safer, tucked into an innocuous part of the forest I was sure only I knew about. I'd stumbled upon it by accident a couple of years ago, after getting briefly lost. I contemplated setting a fire like I usually would, which is probably frowned upon, I know, but I felt like it would draw too much attention. That feeling of being watched, like tiny pinpricks along my skin, had started up again. I forced myself to breathe as I sat in front of my tent and choked down a peanut butter sandwich for dinner. The full darkness of night soon prevailed. The stars shone brightly through the trees as I laid down in a blanket to watch them for a while. It was then, as I managed to find a small semblance of peace, that a twig cracked in the distance. I frowned and sat up, peering into the darkness around me, though I couldn't see past where the clearing ended. I was just reaching for my flashlight when the wind blew again, my hair lifting with it, and there was that sickly sweet smell of decay. Panic started to set in. I quickly moved into my tent, zipping it up securely. I hugged my knees to my chest and listened, squeezing my eyes shut as the noises grew more frequent. Another broken branch. Shuffling of leaves. Ragged breathing. I found myself shaking my head, thinking that this couldn't be happening. Not now. Not to me.
Look, trail.
The voice was just as grating as before.
Wait, dark.
It grew closer. I could hear the movement as it stepped into the clearing, the sound of brush giving way to the whispering of grass. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, trying to piece things together. The smell, the limited words, the clop-clop of hooven feet. It hit me suddenly what it was, what it had to be. Goatman. I'd read about him plenty of times. I'd laughed those stories off. I certainly wasn't laughing now. As Goatman shuffled closer to my tent, he began circling it.
There. Dark. Wait.
He repeated, pausing steps every now and then. I was praying he'd go away. Maybe he didn't know I was in here. Maybe he'd get bored.
Dark. Ambush. Tent.
What? Where had he heard that? Because that's what this was, right? He only had words he'd heard before. Who was on this trail had said that. My panic continued to rise, though I didn't dare make a move. Twigs snapped suddenly, somewhere in the direction of the trail. My head snapped to it involuntarily, and I had a sickening image of Goatman doing the same thing, listening for more words. The footsteps that grew closer sounded like they were being made by something, someone desperately trying to keep quiet, but failing. Why do you need camo for fishing? I thought again. this time just a bit hysterically. Goatman happened to stop on the opposite side of the tent, which favored him by allowing him to remain unseen. Not that it wasn't almost pitch dark out there, save for the moon and stars. Goatman lingered for a second, my attention snapping between him and the bumbling from the other direction, before he ambled away into the night. There was a second where I stayed perfectly frozen, before that survival instinct I mentioned finally kicked in. I scrambled to grab my wallet from my backpack, then shoved it in my pants pocket. Keys? Check. Phone? Check. Flashlight. It'll give me away if I use it, but it's heavy duty, good for swinging. Check. Shoes tied? Check. Deep breath. I paused to inhale deeply. Check. I put my hand on the zipper and stopped to listen. They were probably just at the edge of the trees. The opening of the tent wasn't facing towards them, but it wasn't facing away either. But Goatman had gone that way, so that was a no-go anyway. The steps stopped, and I knew they must be looking right at me. I took a second to decide how to approach my escape. I already decided that my tent belonged to the woods now, and my backpack would only slow me down. Do I hurtle out and book it, or do I casually get out and then run? I placed my hand on the zipper. It was now or never. The sound of the zip seemed as loud as a gunshot. I slowly climbed out, making sure not to appear aware of the eyes on me. I gave a slow stretch, eyes steady ahead. I took a breath and pushed down all my fear and panic. Then I broke into a dead sprint. I heard one of the men shout, but I didn't hesitate as I ran towards the forest. The plan was to run straight and then cut right, to get back out onto the trail. I knew if I got out onto the trail that I could outrun them. I could hide if I needed once I was far enough away. They thundered after me, cursing loudly. I hit the layers of trees with a stumble, but my momentum kept me going. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, the trees' black lines cutting through the gray. My arms got scratched as branches whipped past. I wanted to turn my head to see if they were close. I could make out the sound of their steps over mine. I wanted to see if I could make out any sign of the trail I was running parallel to, but I didn't dare do so, for fear of tripping horror movie style. I fell anyway. 1 second I was upright, and the next I was falling, landing hard on my shoulder. My flashlight was lost to the dark forest floor. Dirt covered my hands as I scrambled to get to my feet again. I was too late. A hand closed around the back of my shirt, yanking me harshly back. A scream almost tore itself from my throat, but then a hand was over my mouth, another one winding around my waist. I thrashed and tried to kick out, digging my hands into his arm around me. He held steady, laughing between his pants.
Should have known you were a runner.
His hand slid lower over my hip despite my efforts. Tears filled my eyes and spilled down my cheeks like traitors. His buddy showed up behind us, slowing his gait to a light jog. He was breathing far heavier than the one holding me.
Bitch is fast, ain't she? You know I love when they fight, though.
The hand over my mouth loosened for a second as his other one moved to the button of my pants. Blind panic shot through me, and I bit down as hard as I could, warm copper filling my mouth.
Fucking whore!
I threw my entire weight forward, which once again sent me sprawling. The next seconds were a blur of hands grabbing at me, rocks digging into my hands as I struggled to get traction. I was sure for a moment that this was it. I was done for. I had thought Goatman would be my end. Not this. Not like this. My hands touched metal just as my ankle was grabbed. I didn't hesitate. He used the grip on me as leverage to twist around and swing. There was a crack as the flashlight connected with bone. The hand released me. The man it was attached to was yelling. I swung blindly once more, striking something soft this time. The hands reaching for me were gone. I no longer tried to run forward. Instead, I focused on getting to the path, cutting into the woods at a 90-degree angle. I was on all fours for a couple feet before I was finally vertical. My heart was pounding harder than ever, tears and snot running down my face. The taste of blood stained my tongue. I was more or less staggering through the brush, breathing heavily. Hide, my brain was yelling. Hide, hide, hide. You're making too much noise. So I hid. I made out a patch of ferns in the dark, dropped to my knees and crawled into it. I pressed my back to a tree facing the trail. They wouldn't see me. I tried to calm my breathing, but couldn't stop the way it hitched on sobs. I could hear them once again trudging towards me, slowly this time. They were whispering harshly back and forth.
"You think she made it back on?" "Shh, you talking ain't gonna help us."
Goatman gurgled from next to me. I had to clap a hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. I slammed my eyes shut, trying to stop from sobbing. He sounded pleased with his new word. He was crouched next to me. I could tell, could feel his rotten breath on my face, could only imagine what he looked like next to me. Hooven feet and sideways pupils focused on me, watching, listening. Rough fingers were run gently over my hair, trailing over to the side of my face. There was a moment where I was nothing but the personification of Frozen.
"Runner, fast." "Did you hear that?"
Close. The men were close. What was a worse way to die? By their hands or Goatman's?
"Sounded like talking." "Talking?"
Goatman mused next to me.
"Ambush."
And then he was gone once more, heading back towards my tent. His steps weren't light, branches crunching under his feet as he went.
"Listen that way. Going back toward her tent." "Must be. Come on. She may have a phone."
And after Goatman, they went. I sat there dumbfounded as I was still alive. I sat there breathing, amazed that I still was. Then I shakily got to my feet, making my way to the trail as quietly as possible. The relief that washed over me when the sound of the stream reached me was bittersweet. I had miles to go before I was out of the woods, both figuratively and literally. I started running when my feet reached the beaten-down soil of the path. I didn't stop when the screaming started. I certainly didn't look back when it started to echo. I didn't stop till I hit the trailhead, dawn just beginning to bleed light through the canopy of trees. My feet ached. Cramps had me clutching my sides. My muscles were screaming. I paused only to throw up, dry heaving long after my stomach was emptied. There was a brief, sinking moment of terror when I saw my car and their truck in the parking lot. The thought that they'd done something to it suddenly hitting me. They evidently didn't think I'd be making it out alive, as my car started fine. My hands were shaking as they gripped the wheel. They were shaking the whole drive home and long after I'd made it there. I locked all my doors, pulled all the blinds, closed all the curtains. I showered and sobbed and brushed my teeth till my gums were red. I chased a sleeping pill with a bottle of water, then took another just for good measure. I slept and thankfully didn't dream. I wrote this all just now after waking up. This is just as much of a warning as it is a way to get it off my mind, so I can hopefully push it all down. I finish with this. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods with monsters, pray that there's something worse out there. It may be the only way you survive. And if that something worse happens to be Goatman, don't you dare say a word. Because if you have, then I'm afraid it may be too late.